All right, let's get started. Man, I am so excited to be here. And Erica and the kids are around here somewhere. She'll be joining me on stage in a minute. But I want to just go ahead and get started and saying, as I was sitting here waiting to get started, I was just looking around the room, and I'm just praying for you. I'm excited because you're here, because you are potential disciple makers. Some of you are probably disciple makers already, and tonight you're just coming to hone your skills in doing that. But that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. I think next week's theme is a little more discipleship, but tonight we're going to really be talking about getting connected, living in community with non-believers, or some people today say not yet believers. How do we live in relationship with them and get opportunities with them to be able to share the gospel? So let me begin by prayer. Man, we're going to cover a lot in a short amount of time tonight, and we all need help just as processing this, and especially as we leave tonight. So let's just pray that God would help us with this. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you brought us together here tonight. Lord, a room full of disciples who want to be disciple makers. God, I pray that tonight that you would just bless our time together. God, I pray that you would give me clarity of thought and speech, and Erica too. God, I pray that you would just inspire our hearts all over again, Lord, because we get tired, we drift, and we need to come back to the center and focus on those things that are most important. So, Lord, tonight I pray that you would bless our time together. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I want to begin tonight by just confessing that I, the missionary, struggled to stay consistent with what I'm about to challenge you with myself. We've been, as you know, in China for 15 years, and I have to regularly come back and remind myself of some of the principles that I'm going to share with you tonight. Even since we've been back in the States these last few months, you know, when we first landed in June, it was that kind of the game plan was, we're here for a couple of months, we speak at a lot of churches, we get a lot of people on board with missions and with IMB, speak in some vacation Bible schools, get everybody pumped up, and then we go back to the field. Well, as you know, as some of you know, we were busy for those couple of months, and we were doing just that. But then 2 months turned into 3, and as with many of you, some of those long struggles turned into 4 and 5 months. And before you know it, we're here, and I'm asking myself, okay, I've done the mission vision casting thing. I'm kind of ready to really, I'm ready for us to get back into just the mission lifestyle again, just the disciple-making lifestyle that God's called every believer to live. And so I had to apologize to my family and say, guys, I'm sorry, I have not been leading us on mission here in Northport as well as I should. And we need to get back on task again. And it was about that time that Scott first asked me to do this mission training, and I'm so glad he did, because it just kind of brought a lot of clarity to what God wants our family to be doing over these next 6-8 weeks as we're still waiting on passports and visas so we can return to the field. So I just want to say that up front, to say that, you know, you're not listening to a professional. You're not listening to somebody who's doing something that you can't do. There's not a thing that we're going to talk about tonight. There's not a thing that we're going to share with you that you can't do yourself, whether you're 15 years old or 75 years old. Everybody in the room can do everything that we're talking about. And so tonight, we want to just share with you some things we've learned about being on mission in everyday life. So I want to begin with the question, what is evangelism? And as we think about evangelism, I want to go first to Scripture and remind you that we are all evangelists, as we generally use the term. You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. God has called every believer. Some people, when they share the Great Commission of Matthew 28, some people can excuse that and say, well, maybe he was talking to his only disciples. Well, I don't believe that's true, but I see why some people would say that. This was clearly written to all believers. It was written to everyday believers like yourself and like me, to say that if you are chosen by God, you are a priesthood. You're a holy nation. You were chosen for a purpose. You're not chosen just to get out of hell safe card. You were chosen for a purpose, and his purpose was to proclaim the excellencies of him who called you, proclaim the excellencies of God among all the nations. And so tonight, that's where we always want to begin. When we talk about doing discipleship, we're not talking about doing discipleship just because it's the thing that we feel like we should do. We're not just doing it because out of obedience to a command. We're doing it because we have been rescued out of darkness, and we want to tell other people about the one who calls them into the light. So what is evangelism? Is evangelism this guy? Evangelism is not just a public presentation. A lot of people are intimidated by the word evangelism because people like this come to mind. I'm sure this guy's heart is in the right place. I'm sure he's really a believer and he wants other people to know. This is not a public, evangelism is not just a public presentation. Is it a public presentation? Yes, in some cases it certainly is. What about this? Is evangelism is not just an event. Anybody recognize this guy? Oh, Billy Graham, yes. Billy Graham is recognized as one of the greatest evangelists of the last century. But evangelism is not just an event. It's not just something it's not like a revival or crusade where you bring your friends to and they hear a public presentation of the gospel. Though that's a great thing, evangelism is not just an event. Evangelism is not just a printed doctrine. It's not a printed doctrine like the 4 spiritual laws or other tracts that you may use to tell other people about Jesus. It's more than that. In fact, let me ask you guys, and where's Scott with the mic? Bob, where are you with the mic?
Right here.
All right. Anybody, I don't know what kind of good sharers we have at Northport, but any of you willing just to share, and when you hear evangelism, what word comes to mind as the goal of evangelism? Why might a person share the gospel with somebody else? Any thoughts?
Say again, Barbara.
In order that they can be saved.
Okay, in order that it could be saved. Of course. Of course we want them to be saved. Any other ideas that come to mind? Not a trick question here. Yes. It is. It's so that they can be saved. It is so that they can be saved from what? From sin, from hell, from death. But what are they saved to? Eternal life. But as believers, we believe, don't we believe that it is that, but it's more than that. Hopefully, most of us in the room know what it's like to be saved, not just from hell, but to be saved to Jesus and to be saved into a relationship, a daily walk, a daily relationship with Him, an ever-increasing sweetness of fellowship with Christ. In fact, when we think about the classic verses in the Bible, passages in the Bible that talk about evangelism, isn't the Great Commission one of those first verses that come to mind? Jesus said, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit." You notice what the command was? It's to make disciples. So there's not a lot of talk of, as we traditionally think of evangelism, in this statement. He doesn't use the word evangelism. Is evangelism implied? It is implied. Of course it is. But the end goal of evangelism, as Jesus' priority was to make disciples. Jesus' command was not to make simply converts. Jesus' command, i.e. the Great Commission, was to make disciples. Now let me ask you another question. Get the mic ready. What's the difference between a convert and a disciple? Or a confessor and a disciple? Any ideas? You all know, it's just who's going to speak out first. Okay, a convert's a new believer. If you're not close to the mic, you can shout it out. I'll repeat what you say. Okay, is a convert or a disciple? A disciple. Sure, yes. So I think we're sharing the same kind of language here. Yeah, the convert is maybe just someone who says that they believe in Jesus. And let's just say a true convert. A true convert is someone who really does believe in Jesus, but maybe they don't have a real life change. A disciple, however, is not someone who just believes in Jesus, but they're willing to sell all that they have to follow him. In fact, Jesus, in John, he actually says, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So one of the marks of a disciple is that they abide in Christ. As they continue to know the truth of Christ and follow him, they are set free. Jesus also said, but by this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. You hear that? There's a way that you can prove that you're a disciple of God. How is that? By bearing fruit. The fruit of your life is what proves that you're a disciple of God. Jesus his end goal was not just to save people from hell. Jesus' goal was that people would become his disciples in every area of life. One guy that I've learned a lot about from says, we want to lead people from unbelief to belief in every area of life. So if our goal, if our priority is the same as Jesus' priority, we want to be about not just making converts, not just getting people to church. We want to be about leading people to follow Jesus in every area of life. So if the Christian mission is not merely just to preach the gospel, not just to give a presentation, but to make disciples, lives transformed by the gospel, how might we need to change the way we think about evangelism? That's the question I want to ask tonight. If our goal is not just to have people walk an aisle or fill a card or however you do it at the church you're from, if that's not the goal, if the goal is lives that are changed and people that are following Christ, how might we need to change the way we think about our approach to evangelism? I want to share a little story with you from this summer. So, growing up, I enjoyed fishing growing up. I wouldn't call myself a fisherman, but I didn't grow up on with a boat and all of all the toys that a lot of men have to get out and really do serious fishing. We mostly went to ponds, did live bait, and and so catfish, that kind of thing. So I never really understood much about bass fishing. But I married into a family where Erica's dad he's kind of all things outdoor, like a lot of you guys. He owns land, he has a lake, all this stuff. So when I married in, I was like, okay, I have to be honest with you. I'm a grown man, but I don't know how to catch a bass. Can you teach me how to catch a bass? Well, he taught me some things. I got pretty knowledgeable about how to do that. But I said, I want Elijah my son, to grow up from an earlier age learning how to catch fish than I did. So I said, let's start training Elijah too. Well, let me tell you two ways that I could have trained Elijah to be a fisherman, and you tell me which one seems to make more sense. First of all, if I told Elijah, son, you're 11 years old, I want to train you to be a fisherman. So I said, I'm busy, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you how to be a fisherman, and then I want you to go do it. So I said, all right, Elijah, this is a fishing pole. This is a line. This is a hook. You put your bobber on your lead. You tie your hook on the end of the line. Thread your worm on. Throw it in the water. Wait. You'll catch a fish. Now, assuming he has a good day and he follows the instructions well, he'll go down to the lake and he'll catch a fish. So he comes back to the house after catching his fish and he says, Dad, I'm a fisherman now. Is Elijah a fisherman? No. He's caught a fish. There's a difference between being a fisherman and catching a fish. What if, on the other hand, instead of just telling him, go down to the lake and this is how you catch a fish, what if I said, Elijah, there's kind of a lot to being a fisherman. And I've learned a lot from your papa about how to become a fisherman. So I want you to be a fisherman. So this is what we're going to do. I want you to go with me every weekend for the next 8 weeks, and we'll take the boat out. We'll get all the gear, and I just want you to watch everything and I'm going to show you everything that I've learned about being a fisherman. You're going to learn which lures to use in the morning and which ones to use in the afternoons. You're going to learn when the fish are shallow, when the fish are deep. You're going to learn the difference between a crankbait, a spin bait, a jig. I'm going to teach you everything I know about fishermen. What do you think the chances are at the end of 8 weeks he's going to be look much more like a fisherman? Chances are pretty good, right? I think that traditionally in the church, our evangelism is more like the first method. We get through a presentation, and sometimes it feels awkward. We get them in the door, and then we're content to be hands off, if we get them that far. But we're making converts, but we're not making disciples. And to be honest, when I look around at the culture that we live in the States, when I look at most of you, there are not many of you, I would guess, who came from places of truly of being completely outside of church, outside of the faith. Probably most of you grew up in the church or connected in some way. So I'm saying, how do we engage the truly unengaged? And there are thousands in Tuscaloosa County. And in our neighborhood, there are 100 houses within 15 minutes of walk of where we live. And many of them are out of church and probably know something about the Bible story, but have no idea what it means to really be followers of Christ. So tonight, we want to talk about what it looks like to take those first steps of getting connected with the truly unreached, so that we can begin that process of leading them to become fully faithful followers of Christ. Now, Eric is going to come up, and we're just going to share with you some examples of what it looks like to get connected to non-believers in your lives. A lot of times we feel like I can't do that because I don't have time. I can't do that because I don't have the knowledge or the skill set. I don't know how to engage the non-believers in my life. And so we're just going to share with some examples about how you can be an everyday disciple, meaning that how you can connect with believers in everything that you do in life. Again, I'm going to say this a couple more times throughout our presentation tonight, that we're not going to tell you anything to do tonight that you can't do in the normal rhythms of life that you are already living. First thing is, we talk about how to make disciples in everyday life, is get intentional. So we're going to talk about four steps tonight to making disciples in your everyday lives. The first is, and we'll come back to these, get intentional, get connected, get personal, and get to Jesus. And if you think about concentric circles, the first is just getting your mind ready. It's getting intentional about thinking, how do I plan my life so that I'm thinking like a missionary? We got to change the way we think about our weeks, about setting up our weeks. We got to change the way our intentionality. Might need to move you over here so it's not blocking the street. We need to plan for it, because you don't do these things by accident. They're not hard, but we've got to plan for them. How do we get connected? How do you get connected and get into deep life relationships with non-believers, completely non-believers?
And one thing about getting intentional, I would say one thing that really changed my perspective on living missionally was I just made a commitment that before I would walk out the door every time, I would just say, okay, stop, and I would pray, God, would you give me an opportunity to take somebody +1 today, just one step closer to thinking spiritual thoughts, thinking on Christ, thinking on God as their creator, whatever opportunity it is, but would you just give me an opportunity today? And so I'd still do that before I walk out the door each time to run errands, to go grocery shopping, to take my kids somewhere. I just ask the Lord every time, would you give me an opportunity to take someone +1? And so I think that has really worked in my own heart and just made me think, okay, now I'm looking for an opportunity. So it just really helps with being intentional.
Yes, absolutely. So in the first area that we're going to talk about is just getting intentional, reorienting your life around mission. Here's the thing about living a life that is missional, is the term that you'll hear a lot these days, is to live a missional life, you have to, in the same way that you start your week thinking about, when do we need to pick the kids up from school? When do we need to go grocery shopping? When do we need to do these things? If you're going to live in a missional lifestyle, you don't just trip and fall into it. It doesn't happen by accident. It has to be something that you really believe is an important part of your life and something that you want God to redeem and to build into your life. So, for example, if your child, middle high school age child, gets into sports, Okay, so when they get into sports, suddenly there's a big new priority that comes into your lives, right? So they may practice 5 days a week, and you have to think about, okay, how do we change our lives so that mom or dad is always available to pick them up after school or after their practice? You may think about, okay, so on every Friday night, we're going to travel to a football game. So every Friday night is blocked out. We don't do anything else on Friday night because Friday nights for the next 4 months, that's football night. You change your life around what matters. And missional living is not just something that you do every now and then. See, evangelism, just in the traditional sense, is pretty easy. It's intimidating, but it doesn't demand much of your life because as you have time, as you think about it, maybe you give a tract, maybe you tell someone about Jesus. But living a missional lifestyle says that you reorganize your priorities around mission, around living in relationship with non-believers. Now again, I'm not talking about adding to, I'm just talking about being more intentional and reprioritizing our lives. So, how do we get intentional? One way that you get intentional is identify the non-believers in your circle of influence. Everyone in this room has different people in your circles of influence. So, what are some circles of influence? Maybe I can ask you guys. Circle of influence mean people that you are around on almost a weekly basis.
Yeah, I would say it's places where you're going to be able to touch and talk to those same people at least every week. So that would be your circle of influence. So if you are doing Vol, then those are the people, that's your mission field, the people that you're going to see every single week and who are going to see you every single week as well.
Yes. So and we're going to talk more about specific circles of influence that you all have. So identify the non-believers in your circle of influence, and then include non-believers in the regular rhythms of your life. This is a radical thought for most of us. Most of us spend 90% of our time, maybe 95% of our time, with people like us. And honestly, when we first came back to the States this year, that was real easy for us to do because when we came back, churches around Tuscaloosa County wanted us to come speak and share about missions. And, we were 2 months in, and I'm like, man, I've spent 2 months with the church and hardly any time with non-believers because we're so much out of our mission field. And so it's easy to get off mission. But so we had to kind of like dial back in again and say, okay, where are the non-believers in our lives? Where are we surrounding ourselves with non-believers in our lives? We need to include non-believers in the regular rhythms of our lives. And daily pray for our non-believing friends. There should be a list of people, of non-believers name list in your house somewhere where you and your spouse and your children are praying for people, for your neighbors. If just that first circle of influence of your neighborhood, there should be a list of people that you're praying for.
A testimony really quickly about that. We pray for non-believers that we meet throughout the week, and we just kind of pray for them as they come up. But then on Saturday, we have like a very specific prayer time as a family in the morning to pray for all the non-believers that we've met through the past weeks. And so there was one day I went to Publix grocery store, and I was getting some lunch meat, and my daughter Evie was with me. And the man who was selling me the lunch meat, his name is Robert. And I said, "Hey, Robert, so good to see you." And Evie said, "Oh, that's Robert. We've been praying for you." And I was like, We have been praying for you and our family. We just want to, just ask the Lord to bless you. And like he had kind of shared with me some of his story about Father's Day one time and some things that were going on in his life. And I had been praying for him, and just every time I went, I looked for him, and we're going to talk about this strategy. But just every time I went, I looked for him, and I called him by name, and I looked him in the eye, and I would always tell him something about the Lord in my life. And so it was really just a sweet testimony, though, that like our kids, it really does affect them, and they really do remember these people, and it does enter their hearts as true prayers they're lifting to the Lord for these people's salvation.
Yes, absolutely. So I want us to think tonight, as you think about circles of influence and living with non-believers in the everyday rhythms of life, I want us to start beginning by thinking about where you are called, where God has placed you to make disciples in your lives. Different ones of us have different capacity to engage and to live with non-believers on different levels. So, for example, in our lives, so let's say the first circle is, you can say, is home. Erica spends she spends her life with our little disciples, with our 3 kids in our home. You know, she's with them because we're a homeschool family. She's with them all day and all night. She's with them all the time. She spends a lot of time with our kids. Because I work outside the home a lot, my time is limited there. But there's still that's still my first priority, my first circle of influence. On the flip side of that, because Erica is in the home a lot more, she has a heavier influence in our children's lives as disciples because she's with them all day. But she's not at this season of life as much out in our community, in our neighborhood. She's not going to coffee shops and hanging out with non-believers there. And so we have to realize where we're at and engage to the right level where we are. So I'd say your first circle of influence is your home. And then outside of that, probably the next group that most of you spend the most time with would be your work or your school. Right? Now, I want you guys, this is kind of an all play. I want just different ones to kind of just pop out and yell out where you work. I just want to get an idea of all of the different places where we work. So just say the name of your workplace. Whoever can start, just kind of popcorn around. University of Alabama. Okay. Okay. At home.
Do you go
Okay.
to school? That's your job. That is your full-time
student.
job. Just ask my kids. That is your full-time job, is school, all day, every day.
Actually, it's cut off up there, but you see here, I actually put work and school on the same slide because we're kind of treating those. There it is. Because we're kind of treating those the same. It's the place where you spend the most of your time. If you're a student, you are working. You're working for a degree instead of a paycheck, but you're working. Okay, so you're a student. Where else? University student? Northport Elementary, a teacher. All right. Come on, this is supposed to be the easy one. Come on, just tell me where you work. DCH.
Yeah.
Hospital. Okay, so these are some of the places that you work in, and with every name that pops up, in my mind, I'm just thinking like 100 people. I mean, they're people that you're just rubbing shoulders with every day. I mean, we're talking about potentially thousands of people in this one room, non-believers, that Pastor John is never going to influence. You can pay him as big a salary as you want. He can work as hard as he wants, but he's not going to have influence on most of those 1,000 non-believers' lives, but you will.
And one thing we would say is a lot of people look at international missionaries and they're like, oh, you're the missionary. I'm the lay person. I'm sending you. I'm praying for you. And those are wonderful things. But actually, when you said yes to the Lordship of Christ, you also became a missionary. And so where is your mission field? Ours is in Asia. Hopefully, again, very soon. And but yours is wherever you spend the bulk of your time. It is your job. It is your school. It is where you spend 80-90% of your day. That is your mission field. And so I think just beginning to think of it as that and think of it like, okay, I'm walking out the door and I am going to my mission field. And I think that helps that intentionality as well.
Yes. So here's some ideas about engaging work or school. First, again, is identify the non-believers in that circle of influence. When we're on the field, Bobby and Tammy probably do this too. We make what we call oikos list of people in our circles of influence, people that we see on a regular basis. I would encourage you to do that. For some of you, the list may be 20 people long. For some, it may be 50 or more people that you see every week or every couple of weeks. Include non-believers in the regular rhythms of your life, like taking coworkers to lunch.
When I worked for an engineering firm in Raleigh, North Carolina, I actually worked with people from all over the world because I worked for an international engineering firm. And there were lots and lots of mini mission fields within my office. And so I noticed every day that some people would bring their lunch and a lot of people would go out. I noticed that there were certain people that brought their lunch almost every day. So I brought my lunch as well. And so I just started engaging them. at some point in the day, I would say, hey, I noticed you brought your lunch and I brought my lunch. Can we sit outside and eat together? I think meals are just the most natural way, especially if you're like a teacher at a school and you have a teacher's lounge. You could kind of pull off to the side and say, hey, can I sit with you today? I'd love to just chat and hear more about your life. And I had a really unique opportunity. There was a girl who was at work with me and very lost from my perspective and just from her own, just admittedly non-believing. And but I didn't let that. She kind of pushed, and then I just said, but I just want to sit with you and eat with you. And I started doing that regularly. And just talking to her, asking her questions about her life, really leaning in and just wanting to hear what her heart was about different things. And it was really interesting because about a year after I had been kind of pushing and really trying, and I just felt so much resistance from her, she had a very bad breakup in her life, and she came to me actually and said, I know you'll pray for me. Can you come with me to my house and just sit with me and talk with me and tell me about Jesus? Like, I can't do it. And so I think it's really just, it's the daily, like just kind of leaning in and saying, I'm here for you. And you've got 21 meals a week, so just use some of those, a few of those, to engage the lost.
Yeah, and I would say start small. Don't say, okay, I'm going to use 5 meals this week to invite non-believers into my life. I would say start with one.
Yeah.
Start with one a week. Just, again, it's about intentionality. Mm-hmm. It's not about adding more to your schedule. It's about being intentional with the schedule you already have. So some of you are maybe planners. Some of you are not. For me, I know if I really want my week to be effective on Sunday night or the latest Monday morning, I'm sitting down and saying, okay, what are the high priority things that I need to do this week? What do the kids need? What does friends such and such need? But at that same time, I'm also saying, when are the openings that I'm going to make so that I can spend time with not yet believers? Pray for your non-believing friends daily. And went too far there. Also, listen, I wanted to speak to the school issue, because there are teachers, there are students in the room, there are a lot of people who engage in school on different levels. Be on mission with your children. Even if your children your children are not yet believers, you can still be on mission with them at this point in their lives. And the best way to do that is through their school. In China, we let all 3 of our children go to kindergarten in the Chinese kindergarten. So they could understand about 30% of what they were hearing. They did the best. They did great. They had a good time. But through that, they were not only, we didn't just put them there to learn language and make friendships. We put them there because that was one of the most important mission fields we could have as a family. So through that, we met the parents of the kids. One afternoon, after I picked our youngest, Evie, up from kindergarten, I took all 3 of the kids to the park near the school, which is where a lot of the parents from that school will go to hang out and let the kids play. And so I saw one guy. So I like to exercise, I like to run. So I saw one guy playing with his daughter who looked about Evie's age, and I walked over to him. I said, "I see you're wearing running clothes. Do you like to exercise?" And he said, "I do, yeah." I said, "Yeah, I do too." I said, how old is your daughter?" And he said, "She's 6 years old, and she goes to this kindergarten." I said, "My daughter's 6 years old and got that kindergarten. What's the teacher's name?" "Our daughters are in the same class." And I was like, we should go run together sometime. We've got so much in common. He said, "Let's do that." So we went running, and over the course of running 2 or 3 times together, we were able to just start having some redemptive conversations. We're just talking about how the Lord has helped us in our parenting, and the difference that being a follower of Christ makes to our parenting. So there are just opportunities all around us if we'll just be intentional.
One thing you're hearing is it's the long haul. So evangelism, as we think of it, is a one-off. And sometimes that's necessary. When we're in a taxi, we're on a bus ride, we're going to do a 5 to 15 minute presentation, because we want those people to have an opportunity to hear the truth and hear the gospel message. But that shouldn't be our norm. Our norm should be, in everyday life, we're just having conversations about what matters most to us. We're having conversations about how God has been faithful to us, about his goodness to us, about how children are an inheritance from the Lord, how about how he's transformed our hearts. There's a family member that we've seen transformed. And so those are just every day. And that's what we're talking about, this +1. It's not just come in and blast with the gospel and then say, believe or not believe, and then walk away from that friendship. It's really just entering in and just a +1 each time. And I think when you think of it that way, it does just fit in your life. It doesn't seem like I've got to go do evangelism tonight. I've got to go, I've got to be a part of this program at my church. It's just every day living missionally and intentionally. And something that made me think of when you were saying be on mission with your kids, I was thinking back to when, and you said maybe they're not even believers. I was thinking back to when Elijah was actually quite small, maybe 6 or 7, and we had just been trying to live missionally with our neighbors. And so David and Elijah ended up taking a little friend in the neighborhood and his dad camping. And that night around the campfire, Elijah had this bracelet. I think one of your teams had brought it over, just like the colored bracelet. And we had kind of talked with him through what that bracelet meant. And he took that bracelet and just started sharing the gospel with this other little boy. And we had never formally trained him in sharing the gospel. And we had never said, this is what you do and, all of this. But I think just because that's kind of just the way we lived, we just constantly were having conversations like that. He just thought, okay, we're here. This is the most important thing. We need to just talk about it. So I think it's interesting how they just catch that as well. So for a lot of you who are parents, as you begin to just have these conversations and your kids are beside you, they might think you're kind of strange at first, but in the end, I think they do catch that vision and just catch that burden and that fire as well.
Does anyone recognize this aerial shot here? It's very close. Nobody? It's probably not big enough to see real well. This is a neighborhood that I've come to learn is called Biscayne Hills. Anybody know where that is now? Does anybody live there? Just raise your hand. You live there. Yay!
We're praying for you. I just
we need to find your house
today.
We probably prayed for your salvation already. So Biscayne Hills is the neighborhood across from the 5 Points Missionary House where we're living this year, and we want to model here what we would do anywhere in the world, which is to try to get to know the believers and non-believers in the neighborhood around us. So I took a photo a couple weeks ago on Google Earth and brought it to the table. I said, kids, I've walked this loop. There are about 100 houses within 15-minute walk of here. This is our mission field. And we need to start praying for the people who live in this neighborhood and start looking for opportunities to engage them. So we've several times since then we'll get out and walk around the loop and just look for just to kind of be visible, just to be out in the neighborhood and to get to know people. If anyone's outside, of course, we're saying hi to them. We're looking for an excuse to ask them a question. Today the kids wanted to go hammocking. And there's one tree in the whole 5 Points property. And so it's hard to hammock on one tree. So we went to a neighbor and asked him if we could hammock in his yard because it's connecting yard and they have some pine trees there. So we went and asked him, is it okay if we hammock in your yard? It was kind of weird. But through that, we met him. We met his dog Pickles. And just kind of started a relationship, and we hammocked in his yard. He said, "If you get hurt, don't find me." And I'm like, "Hey, we're missionaries. Don't worry, you're good." But this is another. What we're trying to do tonight is show you there's so many ways. If you start thinking like a missionary, there's so many ways in your own lives, right where you are, right where you live and where you work, that you can engage in life with non-believers.
And as Pastor John was talking about this morning, this upcoming prayer walking coming up this weekend, I'm so sad we're going to be out of town, but that is an incredible way just to see mountains moved in the mission work and just to see God actually supernaturally remove boundaries and barriers. It's just amazing. And so if you have an opportunity this weekend to be a part of the one in Tuscaloosa, I would highly encourage it. But this is something we've been doing for Biscayne Hills, and actually just this morning I prayer walked the neighborhood, and it's just praying over it and just asking the Lord for what he will accomplish there, and just asking the Lord to tear down barriers, to open eyes, open hearts, to give our family opportunities to speak into and to minister into the lives there. And so you can do that in your very neighborhood. That's something you can do. You can do that in your city. You can do that in your school. You can do that anywhere you are. And I think that's kind of your first battleground, actually, is through prayer. And we've seen just some remarkable things. In fact, just one quick story about a little village where we were working in China, and we had a prayer walking team come about 7 years ago, and they prayer walked this village. It may have been from you, some of you guys. I don't remember the actual team, but prayer walked this village, and then 7 years later, a remarkable story, which you'll hear in a bit, this whole village has been transformed through a life of a lady who was a temple keeper, and many others have become believers, and they have a church there now. And so just an incredible testimony to prayer. So let that be the first place you start, especially. And just that, looking at that map reminded me, get a map of your neighborhood if you don't know your neighborhood, and start walking it and praying it.
So before we keep sharing stories and giving you ideas, I want to put a pin for just a minute and say this. I wish that we could tell you that of all these stories that we're sharing, that 90% of the people believe in Jesus. They haven't. Yeah. Notice I didn't say they didn't. I said they haven't. They're not non-believers. They're not yet believers. Mm-hmm. So I wish that I could say that, 90% have already believed. They haven't. But the glory in what God's called us to in disciple making is that He didn't put the burden of responsibility in their believing on us. He's called us to be living in discipleship. So this is really, we're kind of doing discipleship before people even believe. We're inviting them to come into our world and to see what Jesus looks like as they see that incarnated through our lives, through our families, through the communities that we live in. So I always want to make sure not to build any illusion like, the professionals are just working it all out. I could never do that. That's not true. Everything that we're doing is what you could do as well. So in your neighborhood, here's just a few more ideas. These are things that people are doing in the States. If you have a garden, give some fresh vegetables. We don't have a garden here, but Erica's dad grows veggies, and he'll say, hey, you got any people you want to give vegetables to? We'll go to his land and pick some vegetables and give those to people.
So one day I was riding bikes with our kids around our little neighborhood down the road, and we passed by a house, and there was a lady sitting out on the front porch, and so I was like, maybe I should stop. I don't want to scare her, but then we rode by, and then as we turned around and came back, the Lord just said, yes, you need to stop. This is an opportunity. And so we stopped, and her name is Miss Sarah, and she's an older widowed lady, and she was just sitting outside getting some fresh air, but I just started talking to her and just asking her questions about her life, and we had, 10 minutes of conversation that night as I stood there on the road, and I said, I'd love to come back to see you. Would that be okay? I'll come visit you again. And so we went to pick some vegetables, and I thought this is a great way to get back to see her. Just sometimes we'll take photos with people and print the photos and take it back to them as an opportunity to get in their homes. And so I thought, this is kind of like a photo in China. Just bring some vegetables. So I brought some vegetables to her, and of course, she asked me to come in, and I sat with her, and my girls were with me that night, and just started asking her about her life, asking her about her beliefs, talked to her about church. Just all of that, because the Lord just opened up that opportunity, and we were just saying, okay, we'll do that. And that was easy. Bringing vegetables, that's easy. And it wasn't intimidating. It was just something we were going to do anyway. We had extra anyway. So just thinking about, what can I do that is just something I can do anyway? It's not an extra thing. So.
Yeah. In our neighborhood in China, Elijah wanted to play basketball. He was getting big enough to where he could actually throw a ball 10 feet high. So I actually got permission and hung a basketball goal in our neighborhood in China. And it was a great place for us to connect for Elijah to connect with Chinese boys. It was a place where the Chinese dads would come out sometimes, and we would just shoot hoops together and just get to know each other. There's just in your neighborhood, get creative. And one of the prayers that I pray often for us as a family in the area of mission is I just pray for creativity. Because there are some great, very missional people who are more creative than me. And so I'm always scavenging the web or looking for books and getting ideas for what other people can do. Something I read recently, a guy had a great idea. He said, take advantage of the holidays. Now, we've always done this, but I've never actually thought to teach it. But each year at Christmas, for the past 2 years, on Christmas Day, we'll have an apple cider and cookie giveaway at the front gate of our neighborhood. So as our neighbors, we'll put a poster up on the kind of the front bulletin board of our neighborhood a week beforehand, and we'll say on Christmas night, on December 25th night, we'll be at the gate giving away apple cider and cookies. And as our neighbors come in and out, we give them cookies, and some will stop and carry on a conversation. Some will just get their free cup of cider and walk on to their home. But again, it's another way of being out, being visible, and engaging in any way you can to get into those relationships.